So the dark side of oxytocin that some researchers have proposed is that when it's artificially administered through a nasal spray, and it sort of goes up past the blood-brain barrier and into the brain. There's some evidence from these controlled experiments with economic games that people can either favor their in-group more when they're under the influence of this intranasal oxytocin, or they may have a sort of out-group prejudice that's enhanced. Sometimes these two results are kind of conflated and people aren't sure which is really the finding. I have two concerns about these findings. The first is that a lot of the initial results from the oxytocin literature, where you spray the substance up the participant's nose or they get a placebo nasal spray, and then you have them engage in some sort of artificial task like a trust game or an economic game, often with an anonymous other person, where the effect of oxytocin is lasting for just as long as the experiment, and then they leave the lab and you don't actually know what the long-term effects are, is that a lot of these initial results don't seem to replicate. Basically, what will happen is different laboratories will all run versions of the same experiment, and maybe they don't quite get the effect that they anticipated on the first study, so they say, well, let's call that a pilot study because maybe we need to tweak some aspect of the experimental design. And then they run it again, or a different lab is running it, and you'll find that a subset of these experiments seem to show some kind of effect, and those are the ones that get published. And so in recent years, a number of leading oxytocin researchers have said, let's actually look in our file drawer. Let's look at all the failed experiments that we've run and include those in the meta-analyses and make sure that we really are looking at the full body of evidence. And what a lot of them are suggesting is that overall, it's not clear that there really is robust evidence for these kinds of effects, whether, increasing in-group favoritism or increasing out-group prejudice of some kind. And so, one, I'm not sure how robust these findings are. But another thing to think about is that we release oxytocin in our own brains all the time. For example, when we engage in sensual touch with our partner, or we hug someone, or we, look at a dog. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can do where we stimulate the release of oxytocin within our own brains. And it might well be that when we're having an orgasm with our partner and we're flooding our brains with oxytocin, it might be that, for the next 20 minutes or so, we have a sort of in-group favoritism or increased out-group prejudice even. But no one would suggest that we shouldn't engage in sexual activity because it will increase oxytocin endogenously and therefore might have these negative side effects. So, unless you could show that spraying oxytocin up people's noses has somehow more extreme effects than the natural release of oxytocin that happens all the time through our behavior with others, it would just be strange to think that somehow we should prohibit the use of that or be particularly worried about that. But then, as I say, a lot of the initial results that got people excited about the idea that oxytocin increases trust and bonding and eye contact and all that stuff, a lot of those initial results don't seem to replicate. And currently, the literature is kind of a shrug as to whether these results are going to hold up over time. So we need more evidence about whether oxytocin is as wondrous a molecule as some people have proposed.